Good morning. Nice to see you all here. For those of you who haven't been here, we've been talking about this month ways, of course, to make 2021 your very best year yet, no matter what. And the no matter what, of course, is very important. Who could have dreamed at this time in 2020 that there would be now a world pandemic, unprecedented political chaos, racial riots, and so many economic upheavals? We might not always, of course, be able to change the outer world, as we have certainly seen this year, but we can change our consciousness, and our thinking creates our world, as we've been talking about all through January, and as we talk about all the time at Unity. Our thinking creates our world. Unity worldwide, psychology, modern psychology, Buddhists, theologians, A Course in Miracles, and now quantum physicists are all saying what the Hindu mystics have said for 6,000 years, that much of what we take as reality out there is really Maya, or illusion. And our consciousness is what helps us see through that Maya, or our belief in the illusion that we are victims of circumstances out there. And remember the Chinese symbol for crisis that we talked about, which also means opportunity. We've talked this month about how often crises precede growth and transformation on a personal and a macro level. For example, look at the 1960s in America. Looking out at you, I think some of you do remember the 60s in America. Now that was a time of great upheaval. We were at war, of course, in Vietnam. There were political, racial, and anti-military riots everywhere, with 3 major assassinations, 2 Kennedys and Martin Luther King Jr. The CIA thought that rock music was corrupting the youth of America, and rock music was not going anywhere. It seemed to some that the very fabric of our American society was just coming up unraveled, really. But then followed the 70s and the 80s with a huge spiritual and religious revolution. More young people got baptized than this country had seen for decades. Young people were joining churches and spiritual groups and classes everywhere. They were flocking to the Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. Droves went to India. Tens of thousands took the S training. A lot of you did. I saw you there. Many threw themselves into Sufi dancing, transcendental meditation, and yoga classes. Politically, they committed to making environmental, racial, and world peace changes. There was a greening of America that would never have happened without the chaos of the 60s. People leapt light years from the materialism of the 1950s of their parents. The 60s were a crisis time for many, but in retrospect, that crisis produced the opportunity that many needed to start thinking out of the box. They quit living in the old ways that had produced 2 world wars, racism, Stepford wives, rampant materialism, and the massive pollution of Mother Earth. There were plenty of personal crises in the 60s too. Many people lost their faith in the fundamental religions that they had been raised in. They lost faith in the old power structures and the old norms. Society's exposure to world religions and other spiritual paths produced those spiritual crises. But again, crisis created opportunity for change, for the better. We were grateful for our new spiritual homes in places like Unity. yoga studios, Buddhist sanghas, Sufi and Taoist classes, Yogananda centers, and A Course of Miracles classes, for example. We began to understand that we weren't victims of the outer world. We were the creators of our world. We no longer accepted that some anthropomorphic God out there on a pink cloud with a long beard was out there punishing us and creating crises for us to endure. We saw that simply stuff happens, but it's up to us to see it differently, as opportunity to grow and to change. Every problem and every difficult person can be seen as our guru, our teacher. And last year's political, racial, viral, economic, and terrorist turmoils can be our gurus, our teachers too. They can wake us up and teach us. One thing that became obvious during the international pandemic is that unity in our country and the world is critical. No man is an island, as John Donne said. The opportunity that last year's crisis presented was the true internalization of the fact that we are all in this world so integrally connected that if we are to survive nuclear, economic, viral, and pollution problems on planet Earth, we've got to work together as one in unity. A virus in a remote town in China soon spreads to the whole world. An economic crash in Greece affects the whole European Union. Destroying the Amazon rainforest, for example, affects the entire geosystem. We can't drop a nuclear bomb on a camp of Arab terrorists without causing fallout in neighboring friendly areas, and risk the political fallout of drawing China and Russia into a world war that we will then be a part of. The idea of the oneness of all life and unity isn't just something to hear about in church or in an inaugural speech. We are all intertwined in terms of health, economics, safety. We must work together. The crises of 2020 have helped us see the need to work together. There is no such thing as isolationism anymore. That's a thing of the 19th and 20th centuries, before jet travel, computers, cell phones, and instant news feeds from the most remote island in the world. We are a global village. The pandemic is global, as are world wars and the pollution of planet Earth. It's amazing to me that mystics, theologians, and philosophers have eternally said that we are all one, yet it was a tiny little virus that finally brought the idea home and forced us to face the ramifications of not working together. Bottom line, crisis also presents opportunity and the possibility of great transformation for the good. It's difficult to see the possibilities, of course, when we're right in the middle of the crisis, but in retrospect, we see them. So let's keep the faith. What I'm most interested, though, in talking about today is how to transform your consciousness so that you can weather these storms of life without suffering. Whether it's the crisis of 2020 or the 1960s or the war-torn world of the 40s, the depression of the 20s and 30s, or World War I in 1914, crises are not new. What is perhaps new to some of us are the tools to weather these storms. If these tools aren't new to you, you're one of the people who didn't suffer last year. You knew very well what was going on, and you took action to deal with the situation when possible. You may have felt some pain, like losing a job, but you didn't suffer. If you found last year to be a time of stress and suffering and dejection, listen up today. If your consciousness is what determines your life, how can you transform your consciousness so that you don't suffer? Even if you feel some pain due to situations, you don't suffer. They say that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So what are the tried and true tools that help us avoid suffering? First, we commit. We commit ourselves to our higher power. Truth, God, whatever you feel most comfortable naming, what unity calls the omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent force of the universe, the power, intelligence of the universe. You sacrifice your lower self, your ego self, your me, my individual self, for your real self, which is your we, our, God self. When we sacrifice our lower individual ego, we become one with the all, and we start accessing the wisdom of the ages. This wisdom, power, and presence is like sound waves out there that we can access when we quit separating ourselves from it, from the all, and put up our antennas. It's like the energy, and a lot of people, scientists have talked about this, it's like the energy of every thought and that everyone has ever had in the history of the world, and all the laws of the universe that have ever been are just out there waiting for us to take them in. Many people call that the Akashic Records. It's all available to you when you quit separating yourself from what and who you are, which is a divine part of the all, a drop in the ocean of life. At that point, you're able to avail yourself of all kinds of answers and wisdom and understanding that we block when we separate ourselves from the all or the whole. Every morning, when you wake up, commit to your higher self, the divine presence in you. Say your prayers, meditate, recommit physically, mentally, spiritually to this divine order of life, to your divine self. It's all in you. You're part of it, like a hologram. Commit. Secondly, after committing yourself to the higher path, start working to change your consciousness, your understanding. To do this, you must be willing to wage an inner war. A war against what? A war against the forces of evil. Well, what is evil? Examples of evil are negative thoughts about yourself, about others, thoughts that aren't kind or loving and compassionate toward yourself, toward others, and thoughts of insufficiency. I love the metaphor of waging a war against these negative, unloving, and judgmental thoughts, because we must truly destroy these thoughts. We must conquer them. We must sacrifice them so that we can be free to enjoy life. This is the metaphysical meaning of the biblical story of Isaac sacrificing his only son. The son represents those things dear to us, our firstborn, if you will, our old first programming, the ways of the world. We must let go of these old doubts and negative judgments about ourselves and others. Not to wage battle against our lower self is to allow that lower self to take over our higher self, the forces of good in us. Hope, love, joy, happiness, self-confidence, for example. Let me tell you a story. You know I love stories. It's a Hindu story. It's the story of the Bhagavad Gita, written some 6,000 years ago. It's about a man named Arjuna. Arjuna is every man, capital E. Arjuna represents you and me. His struggles are our struggles. Now, Arjuna happens to be a soldier by profession. In fact, he's a leader of soldiers. He has been conscribed to fight an enemy clan. This evil clan must be dealt with, as they have cheated his righteous and good clan that he's fighting for out of their whole kingdom. Arjuna has to go to war against them, both because it's his job as a soldier, it's his dharma, and also because the enemy represents the forces of evil out there. But Arjuna doesn't want to fight, because that evil clan that he has got to fight includes some of his uncles and cousins and teachers and childhood friends. He doesn't want to kill them. But there he is, standing there on this big battlefield in his white chariot, looking out at the other tribe. His knees are weak. His resolve is nowhere to be found. He doesn't want to fight. What harm is there in that? The harm is that not to fight evil is to allow it to overcome us. So there he is in his chariot between these two forces, good and evil, and he can't get the courage to do his duty and fight. Imagine. Then Lord Krishna, who is a symbol of Christ, Krishna, Christ, you can see how that happened, or in this case, Krishna consciousness, tells Arjuna that he's got to fight. Lord Krishna is Arjuna's higher self, like we say that Christ consciousness is our higher self. So Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna that he's got to fight. First of all, because he's a soldier by profession, so it's his duty. And secondly, because if he doesn't fight off those forces of evil out there, they will overcome the good that his clan represents. And so it goes with our perennial inner battle. We don't want to fight. We just want to let things sort of happen, let the lower self take over. I don't know. I just don't feel like battling it. Some fundamentalist churches call our battle a battle with Satan. I think Satan is as good a poetic image as any, as long as we don't take Satan literally. It's basically about our daily struggles to think and defeat what isn't good in our lives. The bad clan, those bad uncles and bad cousins and bad teachers and friends that Arjuna still doesn't want to fight, symbolize our parent tapes, our childhood bad programming, maybe our negative thoughts. For example, we may have learned from Uncle Tom that it's okay to cheat in business. It's just business. We may have learned from our cousin's example that it was okay to steal all the cookies out of the cookie jar, even if nobody else got dessert. We may have learned from Uncle George that there are times when hatred is justified, like when others do us wrong. These are the inner cousins, uncles, teachers, and childhood friends whom Lord Krishna told Arjuna to destroy. We must all conquer these lower parts of ourselves. And we must be aware that a change of consciousness involves a sacrifice, as in the Bible story of Isaac sacrificing his firstborn. It's a sacrifice of our former self, is what it is. When the Apostle Paul told us, "Do not conform to this world, but be ye transformed," that's what he meant. That's how we transform our world. The transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The universe is the externalization of our soul." No wonder Unity and No Thought were so influenced by the Eastern ideas of the transcendental movement. Yes, our consciousness creates our world, so we'd better tend to our consciousness. Even modern physics tells us that our thoughts create our world. But they go further than just the idea that our thoughts interpret the world out there. Let me quote a 2020 book. I've quoted it before, but not the same thing. The Grand Biocentric Design, that was written by a world-renowned physicist and an MD. It says, "Our minds construct what we know of as reality. The mind is unified with matter. Space and time are another form of our animal understanding. They do not have an independent reality. The universe is simply the complete spatio-temporal logic of the self." The whole point of the book is that even in terms of physics, we create our world. You may remember the old Heisenberg idea in physics class that our very observation of an object changes the object. Well, that was a theory for many years, but now with all the high-tech equipment at MIT and Berkeley and Harvard, they have proven this theory. We humans have a tremendous influence on what we term physical reality. It's not just how we interpret that reality once it's happened. We create what happens. We know that from prayer. So we too must wage Arjuna's battle and struggle against some of our old programs and ideas. They transform our consciousness and our lives so that we begin to see the world through different lenses, through our Christ lenses, Christ vision, if you will. And therefore, we don't suffer as much. We aren't victims of reality. We create it. So the second tool for transformation is waging a war against the obstacles to our evolution, our thinking. Negative thinking must be sacrificed. For example, feeling hopeless or judgmental about ourselves or others, or feeling incapable of changing our lives. In Philippians, the Apostle Paul said, "I can do all things through Christ." And Paul was in jail when he said that. The Romans had imprisoned him. Yes, we can do all things when we are in a state of Christ consciousness. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna told Arjuna that he absolutely could overcome his lack of resolve about waging the battle, and that he could win the battle. When we are in a state of Christ consciousness, we let our Krishna or Christ consciousness be what we listen to. We too can wage the battle and win. In the story, Krishna is on Arjuna's side, so he can win. When we let our Christ self, our higher self, direct our lives, we are given strength beyond our imagination, because we are then hooked into this power, wisdom, and presence of the force of life in the universe. We become part of it. In our present state, sometimes we can't imagine what it's like to be able to harness the omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence that is available to us when we become one with this divine force of the universe. We can then win our battle between our higher and lower selves. Remember the American Indian story of the little Indian boy who was talking to his grandfather, and his grandfather said, "You know, grandson, we all have two wolves inside of us, the bad wolf and the good wolf." And the little boy answered, "Well, Grandpa, which wolf is going to win the battle over our life?" And the brave grandfather said, "Grandson, the one you feed is the one who will win. The wolf you feed survives." And so it is with our inner wolves, our inner struggle with our lower self. We must feed our good wolf, and we must watch what we feed it. Are we feeding our higher self, or are we feeding our lower self? The good wolf or the bad wolf? It does no good to ask for our daily bread in the Lord's Prayer every day if we pollute our minds with negative thoughts. When these negative thoughts come, just note that they're there. They're going to come. I mean, that's normal. But note that they're there. Remember that they are not you. They're like some kind of cinema that's produced automatically according to the programs that get put in there that we don't understand. And then refuse to identify with them. The third tool for banishing suffering from your life after committing to a higher life and then transforming your consciousness through understanding is actually waging the inner war against negative forces. And what follows that then is to actually do what's right and loving and compassionate and true, living what your consciousness has developed and what you've committed to. This will reinforce your commitment and validate your higher consciousness. Live it, do it, say it. Self-control is an especially important aspect of life for all of us. It affects every phase of our lives. When you find yourself spinning out of control, watch your thoughts and emotions in meditation and then say, "I now turn myself over to my higher power, which is in perfect control, and therefore I am in control." Recommit. Give the reins of your chariot to your Lord Krishna, your higher power, your Christ consciousness, and you will remain calm and poised in the face of seeming difficulty and chaos. When you do this, you bring peace and harmony rather than discord and disharmony to your life. If 2020 was a dark time for you, remember that experience tells us that there is always the promise of the dawn of a new day. As little Annie sings in the Broadway musical, the sun will come up tomorrow. So let 2021 be the best year of your life. Remember always that it is not what is happening out there that determines your peace and happiness. It is your consciousness. And ultimately, you will not only interpret things differently, but you will actually create your reality. The Hindus and Buddhists have said that, of course, for thousands of years, but modern psychologists are saying it today. The Notum quantum physicist Matel Pavzik said it just last year. He said, "We assume that the everyday world is out there and that it's more real or independent in a sense, that we play a lesser role in its appearance. Yet experiments show that day-to-day reality is every bit as observer-dependent as dreams are. Everything we experience is just a whirl of information occurring in our heads. This leaves no room for external frameworks. Space and time are not actual entities," he said, "but rather terms that our mind uses to assemble information. The properties of matter itself are always relative to the observer, as opposed to being objective absolutes." Pretty powerful stuff. So commit to your transformation. Think on these things. Act on your commitment. And remember that you don't have to ever do this alone. The divine is always there, in and around you. You are never alone. Thank you.